In the third week of May, Luanne got a job as a packer in the Red Hot Mama's salsa factory. This meant that she stood elbow to elbow with about 100 other people in a sweaty packing line, dicing chilies and tomatillos, and crushing garlic cloves into moving vats, with so much salsa slopping onto the floor that by the end of the day it sloshed around their ankles. The few who hoped to preserve their footwear wore those clear, old-fashioned rain boots that button on over your shoes. Most people gave up the effort. On days when they were packing extra hot, their ankles burned as if they were standing on red ant hills. The ones that handled the chilies grew accustomed to tingling fingertips, and learned never to touch their eyes or private parts, or anyone else's, not even on their days off. No matter how they scrubbed their hands, the residue of Red Hot Mama had a way of sticking around, as pesty and persistent as a chaperone at a high school dance. Truly, this was a sweatshop. Half the time the air conditioner didn't work at all, and all the time the fumes made everybody's eyes water so furiously that contact lenses could not be worn on the premises. Luanne's vision was 20/20, so this wasn't a problem, nor was any of the rest of it for that matter. Luanne loved her job. If Red Hot Mamas had given out enthusiastic employee awards, Luanne would have needed a trophy case. She brought home samples and tried out recipes, some of which would eventually be printed on the jar labels, and some of which would not, God willing. She gave us lectures on how the tiniest amount of cilantro could make or break the perfect salsa. 6 months ago I'd never heard of salsa. Now I was eating it on everything from avocados to pot roast. It came in 3 speeds. The jars with green lids were mild, whereas pink meant hot. The red-lidded jars were called firecracker style. The latter was not a big hit with the kids. Turtle would cry and pant at just the slightest taste, fanning her tongue and eyeing Luanne like she was some spy that had tried to poison us. Dwayne Ray had better sense than to let the stuff enter his mouth. Enough already, I told Luanne. How about we just put the jar on the table and use the honor system? On my nights to cook, I made the blandest things I could think of, broiled white fish and mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese to give our taste buds a chance to grow back. But Luanne had bought the company propaganda hook, line, and sinker. It's good for you, she said. Some doctors recommend a teaspoon a day to prevent ulcers. Plus, it clears your sinuses. I informed Luanne that, thank you very much, my sinuses had just about vacated the premises. Telling it this way, it sounds like a lot of fights, but actually I was liking Luanne a great deal these days. In the few weeks since she'd started working, she had begun to cut her hair far less often, and finally stopped comparing her figure to various farm animals. Having a job of her own seemed to even out some of Luanne's wrinkled edges. She mostly worked swing shift, which meant that she left at 3 in the afternoon, leaving the kids with Edna Poppy and Mrs. Parsons until I came home a couple hours later. For the longest time, Luanne was scared to say 2 words to Edna, for fear she might let slip some reference to eyes. Finally, I cleared the air, just stating right out to Edna that for a great while we hadn't realized she was blind, because she got on so well. Edna had just assumed we knew all along. She took it as a compliment, that it wasn't the first thing we noticed about her. Once she started swing shift, Luanne's experimental family dinners, featuring 5-alarm casserole and so forth, were limited to her days off. Most of the time I fed the kids, and put them to bed before Luanne came home at 11. And then she and I would eat a late supper, or on nights when it was still too hot to look a plate of food in the eye, we would sit at the kitchen table, fanning ourselves in our underwear, reading the paper, and drinking iced coffee. Sleep was hopeless anyway, but mostly we'd talk. At first, all she could ever talk about was cilantro and tomatillos, and the people at Red Hot Mamas. But after a time, things got back to normal. She would leaf through the paper and read me all the disasters. Listen at this. Liberty, Kansas. The parents and doctor of severely deformed Siamese twins joined at the frontal lobe of the brain have been accused of attempting to murder the infants by withholding medical care. Lord, you can't really blame them, can you? I mean, what would you do? Is it better to be totally retarded and deformed and miserable, or just plain old dead? I honestly couldn't say, I said, not having been either one. Although when I thought about it, being dead seemed a lot like not being born yet, and I hadn't especially minded that, but I didn't give it a lot of thought. I was interested in the weather forecast. We hadn't had a drop of rain since that double rainbow hailstorm back in January, and the whole world was looking parched. When you walked by a tree or a bush, it just looked like it ached somehow. I had to drag the water hose around to the back every day for Matty Squash and Beans. The noise of the cicadas was enough to drive you to homicide. Maddie said it was their love call, that they mated during the hottest, driest weeks of the year, but it was beyond belief that any creature, even another cicada, would be attracted to that sound. It was a high, screaming buzz, a sound that hurt your eyes and made your skin shrink, a sound in the same class with scratched-up phonograph records and squeaking chalk. Luanne, who had lived here long enough to make the association, said the sound of the cicadas made her hot. For me, it went way beyond that. I used the air hose to blast the accursed insects out of the low branches of the Palo Verde trees around Maddie's, sending them diving and screaming off through the air like bottle rockets. Every time I walked past the mural of Jesus as Lord, I begged him for rain. But every day the paper said, "No precipitation expected." "Remember that time at the zoo?" Luanne asked, still occupied with the Liberty, Kansas horror. "About those Siamese twins born pregnant, or whatever it was?" "I remember the giant turtles," I said. Luanne laughed. "Now, how's a turtle manage to get pregnant, I'd like to know? Do they get maternity shells? I almost feel like going back to see how she's doing." "Do you know what Esteban told me?" I asked Luanne. "In Spanish, the way to say you have a baby is to say that you give it to the light. Isn't that nice?" "You give the baby to the light?" "Mm-hmm." I was reading a piece about earthquakes under the ocean. They cause giant waves, but in a ship you can't feel it at all, it just rolls under you. I twisted my hair into a knot to try and get it off my sweaty neck. I looked enviously at Luanne's blonde head, cropped like a golf course. "I was so sure Dwayne Ray was going to be a Siamese twin or something," she said, "because I was so big. When he was born, I had to ask the doctor about 15 times if he was normal before it sunk in. I just couldn't believe he was okay." "And now you can't believe he's going to get through a day without strangling or drowning in an ice chest," I said, but in a nice way. I put down the paper and gave Luanne my attention. Why do you think you're such a worrywart, if you don't mind my asking?" "Taylor, can I tell you something?" "Promise you won't tell anybody. Promise you won't laugh." "Cross my heart." "I had this dream, 1 week after he was born. This angel came down, I guess from the sky. I didn't see that part. He was dressed kind of modern, in a suit, you know, with a brown tie. But he was an angel, I'm positive. He had wings. And he said, 'I was sent to you from the future of this planet.' And then he told me my son would not live to see the year 2000. Luanne, please." "But no, that's not even the scariest part. The next morning the horoscope said, 'Listen to the advice of a stranger.' Now, don't you think that's got to mean something? That part's real. It's not a dream. I cut it out and saved it. And Dwayne Ray said something about avoiding unnecessary travel, which I took to mean, traveling through life. Not that you could avoid that. So what on earth was I supposed to do? It scared me to death." "You were just looking for a disaster, that's all. You can't deny you hunt for them, Luanne, even in the paper. If you look hard enough, you can always come up with what you want." "Am I completely screwed up, Taylor? Or what? I've always been this way. My brother and I used to play this game when we were little with a cigar box. That box was our best toy. It had this slinky lady in a long red dress on the inside of the lid, with her dress slit way up to here. It's a wonder Granny Logan didn't confiscate it. She was holding out a cigar, I think. I suppose she was a Kino girl or something, but we said she was a gypsy. We'd make believe that you could say to her, 'Myself at the age of 14, or whatever age, and then we'd look in the box and pretend we could see what we looked like. My brother would go all the way up to 90. He'd say, 'I see myself with a long beard. I live in a large white house with 17 dogs,' and on and on. He loved dogs, see, and Mama and Granny would only let him have just Buster. But me, I was such a chicken liver, I'd just go a couple of weeks into the future at the very most. I'd look at myself, the day school was going to start in September maybe, and I'd say, 'I am wearing a new pink dress,' but I'd never go up to even 20 or 25. I was scared." "Of what?" "That I'd be dead. That I'd look in the box and see myself dead." "But it was just pretend. You could have seen yourself any way you wanted to." "I know that, but that's what I thought I'd see." "Isn't that the most ridiculous thing?" she said. "Maybe it was because of your father. Maybe you got kind of hung up on death because of him dying. No, I'm just totally screwed up, that's all there is to it." "No, Luanne, you have your good points, too." Usually Luanne spit out compliments you tried to feed her like some kind of nasty pill,